All right, in this episode, I am digging into minerals and children, and that's going to cover, I'm going to talk about babies, mostly like 6 months plus, toddlers, and then, slightly older kids as well. The goal is to just break down how we can start to prioritize these with our kids. And I got a ton of questions. I posted a question box on Instagram, and man, the moms delivered. Okay. So I'm going to try to touch on there was a lot of major like repetitive questions and themes. So basically I'm going to get into mineral-rich nutrition for babies, toddlers, kids, give you guys some tips there. And obviously, I don't really think kids should eat that differently from us. It's just more like varying amounts. But there were some really good questions on like how much beef liver and stuff like that. So we'll get into that. And then we're going to go into minerals and gut health in kids, because this is like a whole thing. And I got a lot of questions around eczema. I think I'm going to do a whole separate episode because this is something that I have been going through with my daughter. Unfortunately, it has improved so much, but it's like eczema is like, it's similar with adults, but with kids. And we have questions around testing and stuff I'll talk about at the end. Kids and stool testing is just challenging, especially like toddlers and babies, because their microbiome is shifting so much, and honestly like adults too. But I'll talk about that a bit, but I'm probably gonna do a whole separate episode on eczema because it's just a big topic. And then I'll talk a little bit about supplements in kids, and then testing. I had a lot of questions around testing with babies, toddlers, older kids, etc. So I'll get into all of those topics. And then I got questions around hair, a lot of hair testing questions in kids. I'm going to make that the bonus episode, or this will be like a very, very long one. I'm going to go through hair tests that I have for a toddler in the bonus episode and break it down and hopefully make it understandable. But hair testing is absolutely different in children. Very exciting. So that's the episode. If you want access to the bonus episode where I go through hair testing, the hair test for the toddler, then you can definitely join me on patreon.com/hormonehealingrd. And as always, everything I share is for informational purposes only. I hope that it encourages you to do your own research and talk with your healthcare provider to figure out what makes the most sense for you and your family. So let's dig into the mineral-rich nutrition for babies, toddlers, and kids. One of the big topics that I got questions about was what foods are there for babies and toddlers that promote good mineral balance? It is really not different from what is helpful for adults. And I did a whole series on this on Instagram that I am going to link in the show notes. Yeah, I'll just make that note because I put the recipes in there, but I'll put the other posts in there too, because honestly, I think they're applicable. But kids can still have stress because yes, we want to support. I'll go through foods and everything, but I think that people don't realize, like, when we see imbalances in kids, of course we want to think about like, how was mom's health when she was pregnant? How has the child's gut health been as they've aged? But also like, how is their stress? I don't know why I just don't often hear that topic discussed enough when it comes to kids. Kids have stress too, and that stress will absolutely impact their mineral status. When I go through the hair test on in the bonus episode, you'll see like a pretty stressed pattern in that child. And so that's something where I'm like, this is very real. Kids have stress, and so I think we should definitely try to take that into consideration rather than just trying to throw more minerals in. It's like, well, how can we look at their environment? What are they stressed about? Obviously, like, how much you can discuss with a child is going to vary depending on their age. But just trying to keep that in mind. I mean, it's like, I think about my husband's deployed, and I know that is putting additional stress on my daughter. And so it's like, what can I do to support her minerals more during this time? It's just like us, like probably using up more magnesium, more sodium and potassium. Digestion could potentially be compromised. What is her environment like? What other stressors? What's like the rhythm of our day? So I really look at this very similarly as I do with adults, in looking at like, what is that child's day like? How are they living? And sometimes I feel like we just negate that kids can have stress, and They absolutely can. So what does that look like? Especially like when we have behavioral issues and stuff present, that's very stressful for a child as well. So just keeping that in mind, it's not always just what can we add in? Like, yes, we want to do that. We want to be mindful of food, but how is your child's daily life? And is there any way that you can reduce a little bit of stress, maybe add some more either relaxing or I just think of like fun activities in for them. And do you know what maybe is adding to their stress? Is there a way to minimize it? Things like that. We can't ignore that piece either. So for foods, a mix of animal foods and plant foods, I think is still incredibly important. Muscle meats are going to be great. Any like beef, chicken, pork, eggs, dairy, seafood. Sardines are such a great one. And oysters, if your children will eat them. I find that when you introduce those early, like kids usually like sardines. So that's something that I think can be really helpful. And it's also like, it's an easy food if you get like the canned ones in a high quality oil. Same thing with oysters. So those are things, same as adults, right? Those are things that you would ideally be prioritizing for you. Same as kids, those animal foods are going to provide an abundance of minerals, from zinc to copper to selenium to iodine to vitamin A, which is not a mineral, but it works with minerals and it's very important. And iron. And so definitely wanting to get animal foods in, and protein, because the other piece is like, just like with adults, how are they balancing their blood sugar? What's contributing to their stress? Yes, children are definitely more resilient, I would say, in many cases. And so if they have some like blood sugar swings, I don't necessarily think it's going to have like as big of an impact. But if that's like an everyday thing over and over, that's compounding, like eventually it could definitely impact them. So trying to get a variety of animal proteins in will be important, including those in their main meals, especially so that they can balance their blood sugar and have good attention and focus. I have family visiting, which is why I'm able to, this is the second podcast I'm recording today. It's why I'm able to do that. My mom is here, and it's so funny because it's like, man, talking about how my daughter focuses so well. She has such a good attention span. And like, to me, I feel like it's normal because I spend all my time with her, and I'm used to seeing her like that. And I'm like, I mean, she's like pretty balanced, she eats well, that she's a toddler, so not always, but I'm very intentional, but I'm not obsessive. And if she doesn't eat well, I just don't stress about it. Because I'm like, she'll eat better the next meal. Like, there's nothing you can really do. You can't force a kid to eat. And I don't want to make meals stressful for her, because then it's like, that's not a good environment for her digestion or for an association with food. So learning to let things go has been important. But I think that maybe kids are just more dysregulated, stressed out / blood sugar imbalances that make it harder for those attention spans. And then, nutrient deficiencies on top of that can absolutely play a role. Like zinc is a big one for things like ADHD and behavioral issues in kids. There's often a zinc deficiency present. And like she loves red meat and she does like a good amount of seafood. So she's getting a decent chunk of zinc just from her diet. So I do think that can definitely, like, blood sugar can play a role in many ways. I don't want to just be like, oh, what mineral rich food are you going to put in? It's like, it's not just the food, it's how we're eating it. It's how you're planning it into their meals and considering blood sugar balance and all that stuff as well. Organ meats, obviously great. Things like beef liver, heart, kidney, whatever, you have available to you. I feel like beef liver is the easiest one for most people to get their hands on. Beef heart's also a really good one. It's like easy to introduce, I feel like. She's always eaten liver since she was little, so she likes it. But I find it's funny how a lot of kids like beef liver. I guess I was very surprised by it. Like, we had friends over and stuff, and their kids hadn't had it before, and I didn't think they were going to want to eat it. I mean, I don't like liver. I did not grow up eating it. And so I'm like, these kids are not going to want to eat this. They ate it, and they were like, this is so good. Mom, can you make this? And she was like in shock, one of my friends. And I'm like, listen, I have no idea, but that's amazing. And it was just like a pate that they had with, I think they had it with like carrots and crackers or something and like cheese. So it was like nothing crazy. I've like just fried up beef liver steaks for my daughter and she'll eat them. I can't eat it like that because it doesn't taste good. But I think if you can introduce this stuff to kids young, that beef liver was actually her first food, then that can be extremely helpful. But capsules are fine. I get a lot of questions about like, could I do the beef liver capsules? Obviously with smaller babies and toddlers, like you have to open them up. Older kids could, if they can swallow a capsule, that's fine. But they're easy to mix into things. And like, if you don't, like, I'm going to put, I have a recipe for how I make liver easy to add to meals. Like I just basically like fry it and then puree it and make it like a ground liver so I can mix it into different dishes and hide it because I don't love it. My daughter probably just eat it. But me and my husband like don't love it. So we have to like mix it into things. That is one where if you don't have the capacity to do that right now, maybe you can't find good liver, or it's just something you're trying to focus on for your kid and you don't want to make a ton. Although I do show you how I freeze it in the video. You could do the capsules. They're really easy. Like when we're traveling or like when we moved recently, like I didn't have liver on hand. And so I would just open up a capsule for her and mix it into like taco meat or something like that. So the capsules absolutely work. The amount that you give your child is going to depend on like their weight, how much they really need. I did the hair test for my daughter, so I knew that she definitely needed more copper, but that may not be the case for every child. So that's something you definitely want to consider. And then I had a question, because this is a good time to talk about it. How much beef liver should kids have daily? I just think it really depends. And they don't have to have it every day. Like, think about it. Like 1 to 2 times a week is plenty for most adults. So it's like, why would we give it to a child every day? If they're gonna be like eating it, I would say when they're babies, like a teaspoon 1 to 2 times a week is the general recommendation. And then as they get older, they could definitely eat more. But I would also see like when does your child want it? If you can introduce it when they're young and teach them about it. I recorded a podcast, the one that came out before this one, with my colleague and friend Amy, and we talked a lot about like trying to introduce this stuff to your kids young and also creating a culture in your home that's like supporting all this stuff and educating your kids on like, this is why we prioritize this food, or this is what this food does in your body. And sometimes we're like, oh, do they really understand? But it's like, they pick up so much more than we know. And I think that's another thing where it's like, if you can teach your kids at a young age of like, beef liver has a ton of really important nutrients in it. It's really like food is like medicine type thing. Then that's why we make sure that we eat it, because it makes us really healthy and strong. Then that's something that you can teach a child, and then you can ask them like, do you want some beef liver? And they'll know what it's for. And I just think giving kids choice is so important. And I know sometimes it can be frustrating because they say no, but it's like they're their own people, and you have to model and do the best that you can and hope that you're creating a supportive environment where they want to incorporate it. Older kids, I would say it just like depends. Like the weight is really important. For like an older toddler, I wouldn't do more than like a capsule a day. But again, they don't really need beef liver every day, depending on the child and their deficiencies and stuff like that. But I think treating it like an adult, but a smaller portion. And then of course, as they get much older and they're into like their teen years, they can prioritize more liver. But even a small amount, one time a week or a couple times a week, I would say is going to give that child a lot of nutrients. So that is like the liver piece, organ meats. But I was saying like beef heart is a great one because you can like hide it easily, but with very little effort. Like you can cook beef heart in stew and it comes out good. It's easy to eat and it's not like gamey or anything, or at least I don't think it is. So that's something that you could definitely, I feel like that would be a great organ meat to incorporate. And again, trying not to always like hide the food, teaching your kid, giving them an opportunity to learn about why we eat these foods in our home. And sometimes it requires like the parents to get educated and to prioritize it for yourself. I feel like we're always like, what can I do for my kids? But like, what are you doing for your health? Because we model everything for our children and they pick up on everything. So if they see, oh, mom eats her organ meats because she knows that they give her energy, or they help support her health. They make sure she's healthy and strong. They make her feel good when she eats them. Like, I'm going to want to do that too. So that's like something to consider. Muscle, lots of animal proteins, organ meats are great. Trying to get more whole food carbs in are, root vegetables, fruit. They're going to have a lot more minerals than something like a grain product. But beans and legumes are also great. And I feel like a lot of kids like them. It's like an easier food to incorporate. And like a lot of beans have a ton of potassium and calcium. And I did get a question about calcium and a lot of dairy-free kids. I would really recommend like cooked greens and beans, trying to incorporate those as much as you can, because that's something, and like, sardines, stuff like that, it's going to be helpful, have a lot more calcium in it. If you can get a variety like that, I mean, it's going to give you not only good minerals, but like healthy fibers, other important vitamins that are going to support their immune system and their overall health. So those are really good ones. Fermented foods are great. Especially for like babies and toddlers, because they're softer, so they're a lot easier to chew. So that's something, I did those for a little with my daughter, but she had the eczema flare, histamine issues, and for a while they were making her itchy. So we stopped the fermented foods. But it's like if you can introduce them sooner, I think it's great. They're, again, like easier for them to chew. Like I think of like carrots. It's like carrots are a hard one for a lot of kids until they get a little bit older. But if you can either ferment them yourself or find them fermented, then that's like a very easy food. It was hard because my daughter loved them. Like she loves like pickles, anything like fermented, she loves. I was like, you can't have these for a little while, because it's like she would immediately start to like get really itchy. And it was clear. And I know from my work that a lot of times for people that have histamine issues, they can be an issue. So don't force it. If you feel like your kid's having a reaction, listen to that intuition. And then definitely check out the previous one that I did with my friend Amy. It's about building resiliency in motherhood, but a lot of what we talked about is like creating a culture in your home, educating your whole family on why we make these decisions. And a lot of that, that helps make your life simpler. You're not fighting and arguing with people, trying to convince them of things. It's just the way that you guys live. And I think that helps make a very cohesive and happy home. So definitely check out that episode as well. But that's kind of like my summary. And I'm going to link to some really simple recipes that I did an Instagram post with, of like, here's simple ways to get mineral rich foods in and balancing those meals. They're not like anything fancy, right? So you can adjust them as fits your kind of like taste buds. But there's something where food doesn't have to be fancy, right? I think healthy food should be simple and easy and sustainable. So I'll link those. And then I'm also going to put, I have a mineral chili recipe. That's like a really great way to get your kids to eat beef liver if they're not used to it. And then I have a how to make beans real. So if you are worried about digestion, if your child does have some struggle with digestion, then you can prepare them. You can soak them, but most important, pressure cook them. And that makes them a lot easier to break down. So I'll link those in the show notes. Okay, another question that I got: extremely picky eater, getting any food in is a challenge, let alone nutritionally dense ones. Like tips for that. The things that I think of, I would say zinc comes to mind first for minerals, because zinc is, it's linked with like our smell and our taste. And so part of me wonders, is there a possible zinc deficiency present? That often, it's very prevalent in children. So trying to increase their zinc rich foods, beef is such an easy one. So if you can get your child to eat more red meat, then I would say that's a huge win. Oysters are another good one. Most seafood's going to have some, but if you're like, they're not going to eat that, beef, pork, chickpeas are a good source. Cooked chickpeas, I would pressure cook them. If you can soak them, that's going to make them not only easier to digest, but make it so that you absorb more minerals from them. And when I make beans, I just prep a ton and then I freeze them. Like I'll use some, like I made chili this week. And so I used some of the beans and then I froze the rest of the black beans, and then I'll have those for the next time I need them. But, to me, it's like soaking and pressure cooking. I'm like, this is kind of a lot of work. So I want to make sure I make a bunch, and then I'll usually do like 2 bags of dried beans, and then I'll freeze the rest. And then you'll still have all the nutrition benefits. You do also get zinc from turkey and chicken. There's some in eggs, cooked lentils, but the highest sources, like the most bang for your buck, is going to be beef for sure. Oysters, crab is a good one, pork, chickpeas. Those would be some really good ones, but you're going to get smaller amounts in like dairy, stuff like that. So like it does add up. It's not like if you're eating animal foods, you're probably going to get a decent amount of zinc. But the thing I think about is like if there's a deficiency present, they probably need more. So I would say if they don't eat red meat, can you encourage it? If they have like meat protein aversions, I'd be very curious how their digestion is. And zinc deficiency can make digestion worse. So I'd be focusing on like trying to get relaxed meal times. And I'll talk more about this in the gut health section. Trying to get enough sodium potassium in their diet. That's important for making digestive juices. But zinc is a big one. The other thing I think of is like when they're picky eaters, like, do they have good digestive juice production? Like if they are not making enough digestive juices, they're not going to break down their food well, and it's going to slow down their motility, everything, and have a big impact on their appetite. The other thing I think about is like food exposure. And I know this, having an 18-month-old, I get it. One day she likes the food, one day she doesn't. One day she's adventurous with food, one day she's like, nope, I don't want any of that. I want like the foods that I'm used to and that I like. And it's something where I always remind myself, I remember when I was in dietetic school, we were looking, I don't know the study and I couldn't find it, but we were looking at this study in one of my research classes, and it was talking about kids and how they need like, I think it was at least 14 exposures to a food in order to know if they're to accept it, basically. And I'm like, that is a lot. That's a lot of exposures to a food. So I always kind of keep that in the back of my mind. And that's especially if kids are sensitive to bitter foods based on their genetics. Some people, children, they are much more sensitive to the bitter taste in foods. And so they may be more averse to bitter foods. And then there's some people that are not. And so they may not need as many exposures, but trying to keep that in the back of your mind when you're getting frustrated is like, okay, and this is the other reason why I think it's important to keep meals very simple, so that if they don't want something, it's like, okay, what could I take this out and replace this with and not have to make a whole nother meal? That's like what I've kind of move to, is like, how can I simplify these meals so that if she doesn't want something, I can just quickly replace it with something else and it's not a huge deal. Keep food simple. But remember that 14 exposures, that's a lot. And then trying to get them involved in cooking and choosing the food. I think this is really important. I don't give them too many options to choose from because that could be overwhelming. And then they may not want to participate. So if you can encourage them to cook with you, I think that can be really fun depending on their age. My daughter really didn't get interested in that until she was like 16, 17 months old, but now she's like very interested and wants to be in her little toddler tower and helping me cook, which is great because then, I'll ask her, which vegetable do you want? And I hold up 2 veggies and then she picks the veggie for that meal. She is not chopping a ton up yet. There's attempts, but it's like she's there right with me as I'm cutting it. She's helping me mix the butter or the avocado oil in it. She puts some of the seasonings on, and she is much more likely to eat that food because she's involved in the process. So I think if you can involve them, then that's huge. Amy also talks about that a lot in the episode, especially she has older children and how she gets them involved. So I would definitely listen to that episode, the previous episode as well. And then continuing to offer a variety of foods. Again, I know it can be hard when they're not eating it, but it's like when we're constantly giving kids the same foods, they're much less likely. One, they're more likely to get sick of a lot of those foods or build extremely strong preferences. So it's like, how can we try to get variety in without overwhelming them? And I think a lot of that is like involving them in that process. And then, like I already said, keeping meals simple. And then the other last thing I really think about with this is you are their role model. So how are you eating? What is your relationship like with food? What is your attitude around food? How do you speak about food around them? Because they're going to pick up on that. We can want the best things for our children, but if we are not modeling that, we're probably not going to see that emulated from them. Okay. how/when to introduce solid foods in a nutritionally protective way. So I feel like I'm going to go through this like somewhat quickly. But there's one of my colleagues, she has a course. It's like holistic baby-led weaning. I gotta get the name. Let me make a note for myself. I'll put it in the show notes because I can't think about the top of my head. But I went through that. I've gone through like quite a few baby-led weaning courses, but she has a holistic perspective that I really appreciate. And like there's signs that you want to look for when your baby's ready to eat. I think people try to rush food. I mean, I remember I had some family members that were like, oh, she's not really eating yet. And I'm like, she's not showing all the signs for eating. So no, I'm not feeding her yet. Everyone's got their opinions around when you should give your kids food, but you really want them to be ready. So you want them to be sitting independently. You want them to have good head control. You want them to be interested and want to participate in it. And then the other thing is they need to be able to reach and grab. That's a skill they should have. And then having some sort of readiness to chew the food. So even if it's purees. So if you're not like seeing these signs, then I would say it's probably not time yet. And I think there's like definitely pressure of like, okay, it's by 4 to 6 months, they should be eating this food. I mean, my daughter really wasn't ready until closer to 7 months. And we did introduce like beef liver pate at, I think it was like 6.5 months. And she ate like a decent amount. She was definitely interested in it, but it was like so slow, the introduction to food. And it's funny. And I'm like, I just had this intuition that like, this is what she needs. I mean, she's still nursing constantly. She's still so little. Do I want her to get more nutrients and get exposure? Absolutely. But I mean, even sometimes I wonder if I introduce certain things too early because she ended up having an egg allergy. So I'm definitely not a baby-led weaning expert. That's why I'm going to link to that course. But I think just having the signs of readiness and understanding those is really important and definitely like nutritionally protective, because if the baby's not ready, then I think there's much more of a chance to have like a reaction and not tolerate certain foods. And then, I still think while I'm saying like, don't rush things, I still think it's important for them to have exposure to food. Their nutrient requirements are increasing around this time. It helps with their development, especially their motor development, taste preferences. It's going to help really lay a foundation for that. It's going to help their feeding skills. I just remember being like amazed by all the things my daughter could do when she was so little, like feeding herself with a spoon. I'm like, you were like 9 months. Like it was just wild. So all those things are important. Sensory. I mean, think about how much a mess they make when they're little, and they have so much fun. It's like, it's such good sensory play for them as well. So there's so many benefits to it, but I just think a lot of people feel like, oh my gosh, they're 6 months. I got to feed them. I got to get all these foods in. I got to make all these fancy meals. Keep it simple. Introduce things one at a time. Space it out. I didn't even feed her something every day. At first, we did like every other day. Sometimes weekends we did nothing. So sometimes she only ate like 2 or 3 times a week. And that is totally normal. I think people just, okay, I'm going to give them purees. You're going to have all this food. The pressure is not there, especially in the beginning. It's just getting the exposure, being mindful, giving them space between exposures so that you can see if they're having any sort of reaction to it and it's not like too much for their immune system. And then just not rushing kids if they aren't eating a lot at first. I remember being like so stressed out. She's like 9-10 months. I'm like, she's really not eating that much. She's not showing like a ton of interest outside of like one meal a day. And then it's like, I'm talking to one of my friends that does baby-led weaning stuff. And she's like, that's normal. Like, don't worry about it. And then now, she's a great eater. So I would just say, but first time mom, it's hard because you just don't have that experience. So don't rush them. Take the pressure off yourself and your child. Make it fun. Prioritize nutrient dense foods. I would say do your research. I'm going to link to this course that I took, but also a podcast that you can listen to and learn more about I think baby-led weaning is like a great way to go. Okay, how to get enough potassium in kids if they don't like coconut water. Oh man, there's so many other foods. Also, like sometimes I wish my daughter didn't like coconut water as much because it's so expensive. But I just think of like, I definitely try to prioritize food first, right? Potatoes, winter squash, fruit. I mean, kids love fruit. That's like a great way. But like sweet potatoes, winter squash, regular potatoes, tomatoes are super high in potassium. Beets, if they'll eat them. Again, that's another one that my daughter likes, but we introduced pretty early. Cooked greens, if they like those, but like mango's really high. Animal foods have it, like beef, chicken, pork. Salmon has a ton of potassium, so that's like a great one if they'll eat seafood. And then dairy, like if they're eating dairy, it's like they're going to get it from, I would say the majority of the foods that they're eating are going to have some amount of potassium, but I feel like it's the carb sources and like the more processed, like snacky foods, that if you have like a lot of grains, which I'm not like against grains, but like if you have a lot of grains, it's the carbs, then that could be an issue. Although beans are great. So like those are going to have a good amount of potassium. But then like, if, can they eat dairy? If not, it's not the end of the world. It's not the highest thing. But then, fruits, stuff like that, which I feel like most kids will eat. So it's like, how can you prioritize those kind of carbs into their meals and snacks and make sure that they're not getting too many processed foods that are taking the place of those foods? Okay. My 6-year-old eats ice often. Is this a sign of mineral deficiency? It could possibly be a sign of iron deficiency, but you have to test. You never want to guess and just supplement, is my opinion. I would also consider investigating if they have reflux, because a lot of kids struggle with that and they could be trying to cool that down if they have like a burning sensation. So I would wonder if that's like something. I think my daughter was dealing with that a bit before the eczema kicked off, and she just loves ice and she says it with her little lisp. It's so cute. But I'm like, are you having some digestive distress? And then I started supporting her digestion a little bit, and we pulled out a couple foods, and I was like, okay, now she doesn't want ice anymore. So I would definitely consider, is it a reflux thing? Do they have constipation, digestive issues, those kinds of things? They can definitely be like secondary to reflux. But just asking, I mean, they're 6. It's like, do you have like a burning sensation or anything? Like, do you have sore throat, common sore throats, coughs, stuff like that, raspy voice? All those things can be signs of reflux. So I wouldn't just assume a deficiency. I just see so many kids with gut issues. I would investigate that too. And next, when does this episode come out? I think the next episode that comes out after this one is the reflux one that I'm doing with my friend Michelle. That is really good. So definitely listen to that one if you're thinking it could possibly be reflux. Okay. Minerals and gut health and children. I think that I just see so many kids with digestive issues now. My daughter has eczema. Obviously, digestion plays a huge role in that. And it's just like us. It's like what's their environment like? So many kids are eating while distracted, which I know can be a challenging one. And it doesn't always have to be perfect. Just like I always tell us, like, for adults, it's like, you don't have to eat perfectly every single meal and be completely calm, or eating every single meal outside or something like that. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. That's not realistic. But I would really look at, like, if you're concerned, like if maybe your child's struggling with like behavioral stuff, constipation, any tummy issues, digestive issues, if you assume that they have deficiencies, or that they do, and you're thinking maybe it's possibly from digestion, skin stuff, then think about how important digestion is. And I'm going to put that episode in the notes too. Obviously that one is for adults, but that way I walk through how digestion occurs, which if you don't understand that, I don't want to do it now because this one will be too long, but I walk through how digestion occurs in the body. And once you understand that, then you can understand, okay, this is why stress would have a very big impact on that. If we are in that stressed state, then that gets prioritized. Responding to the stressor, keeping us alive, keeping us safe is the priority. Relaxing and being in the parasympathetic rest and digest state to break down and absorb our food is not. And it is the same for kids. So how can we support digestion in kids? A lot of it is very similar. How can you create a calming eating environment? I think avoiding pressure around food and letting them decide how much they eat is really important. Again, I know that it can be very challenging. I have two close friends whose children have behavioral issues. One has autism. It is not easy. Meal times are generally, I think everyone is stressed. Or like one of my friend's kids is like, she's like, my daughter's stressed out because she knows that it's like a hard time because her brother doesn't really want to eat or throws a fit or something like that. So it's like, I know that it can be really challenging. This doesn't have to be perfect, but I would really be thinking about like if you're worried about digestive issues in your kids or you want to avoid them or support their digestion, what does that eating environment look like? How do you feel in that environment? Are there distractions around? Some people have lots of routines with food and like screens. I'd really try to minimize that as much as you can. And I know a lot of times people will use screens to get their kids to eat more, but that means that they're not tapping into their own intuition and listening to their bodies and letting their bodies tell them. If they're eating more while distracted watching something, then you just have to think about the long-term ramifications for them and their ability to connect with their hunger and fullness cues. And just knowing that it's not going to be perfect with kids. My daughter does not eat perfectly. She doesn't eat everything at every single meal. She hates breakfast, which is like comical because it's my favorite meal of the day, my biggest meal of the day. And it's just like, you can't force it. You have to do the best that you can with what you have. Adjust to your child, but listen to them. And I think for me, removing the pressure reduced my stress and also I think reduced her stress. So not worrying about like, okay, is she going to eat all her protein at this meal? Or, she hasn't really been eating a lot of protein lately. What's that mean for her digestion and stuff? It's very easy to overthink things, but I think, kids are constantly changing and developing new habits and going through different learning stages. I just trying to let that go, I think is so important. And then looking at how are you eating at the meals? Are you on your phone? Are you distracted? Are you engaged in conversation with them? If you're distracted, they're going to want to be distracted or they may have behavioral issues during that time. So I think that's important to think about. I like to think about meals as treating it like a little date with my daughter. We chat. It's like a fun thing. And my daughter takes such a long time to eat most meals, I would say. And it's used to like really frustrate me, but I'm like, this is our time. This is like our chill time during the day. I get to sit, and we get to just like enjoy the food. That's usually when like we'll chat about the food. What are we going to do after lunch? That sort of thing. But mostly just relax and also like not talk and just eat and be together. And I think that can be like a hard thing to do, especially if you feel like you are running on stress hormones, if you have other kids around that maybe they have a harder time at meals. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's like, if you are super stressed, your kids are probably going to be super stressed. So it's like, how can you let it go? I know like cleaning used to be stressful for me around meal times, how messy everything would get, all that kind of stuff. So it's like, what does this look like? How can you prioritize meals and give enough time in your day to them? And sometimes you're not going to have as much time and that's okay. Other times you can really like enjoy that. So it's tricky, but I do think environment is important. How you're eating is important. What are you modeling for them? I think we often forget about that. Are you chewing your food? Like, literally, my husband he barely chews his food. And I'm like, you have to stop doing that because, and if you're listening to this, honey, you've gotten better, but we still need to work on it. Barely chewed his food. And I'm like, she is learning how to eat like you. She ate a whole apple. And I was like, that she definitely got from you. And so it's like, they will pick up on all those things. And it can be hard to kind of slow down and think about how am I doing something, but I think it's one of the most important things that you can do. And then I'm trying to think of like the big ones. I do think you could use some things like I talk about in the episode for like the general digestion one of like, you can use apple cider vinegar prior to meals if your child needs some digestive support. They do make apple cider vinegar gummies. I'm going to share a reel the week that this episode comes out with a recipe for the ones that I make for my daughter. Some days she eats them and some days she doesn't, and that's okay. So I would, I think there's the common objection I get is like, my kid's not going to eat that. It's like, well, have you introduced it to them? Have you tried? Have you given them an option? Have you asked if they want to make them with you? She makes the gummies with me and she likes it. Cause she gets to like mix the pot and everything. So that's something where I think you can definitely involve them in a simpler recipe like that if possible. And then again, explaining, I'm like, these are going to help your tummy. These are going to make it so your skin is not as itchy, that sort of thing. You can also buy ACV gummies. I have no brands that I have tried and trusted. I looked at so many. So if someone has them and they're a good brand, please reach out to me. I don't mind making them, and there's probably more health benefits in the homemade ones, but tell you what, it would be nice to have a good brand that you could purchase, especially for like travel and stuff. So don't have one that, because I know people will ask. Paleo Valley does make an apple cider vinegar complex in a capsule that you can open. And I will use that with her sometimes. And I'll just like mix it into the food. Like when she eats yogurt, I just mix it in and she doesn't even know that it's in there. She sees me put it in and I'm like, this is for your tummy, and try to tell her that this is going to help you make your yogurt extra delicious. It's going to help you break down the food, blah, blah, blah. And so that's something that you could definitely consider. If you have an older child and they can swallow them, then I would think the capsules would be great from Paleo Valley. And they're not sponsoring this episode, but I do have a link where you can get a discount, and it's paleovalley.com/hormone-healing-RD. And then including things like zinc, rich foods, sodium and potassium. So not being afraid of salt with kids. There's a lot of question around like babies. I think that Lily Nichols, she's a dietitian that has a lot of great material around this. I'm actually going to link to her babies and sodium blog, because it's more than I can even like go through in here. I can't believe we already have 42 minutes. Like how? So I'll link to that because there's some controversy with like sodium in kids. By the time they're 6 months to a year, their kidneys are much more developed. So they should be able to handle, it's like, we don't need to avoid salt. You don't want to overdo it, but it's like when you're making their food, and they're not eating processed foods, they need some salt. They need sodium, and sodium is very important for stomach acid production. Same thing with potassium. So it's like, can we get those, the sea salt, high quality sea salt in, potassium rich foods, zinc rich foods, that can be very helpful. I'll talk about supplementation. I just think it's hit or miss with kids and adults, honestly. But those are the things that I would think about for digestive support. And then I'll also link to that previous podcast I did. But primarily it's like, what is that environment like? Can you make it fun? I think eating outside has been great for us when the weather permits. So that's something you can consider. I have this like chair with like a tray that slides onto it that I got at Walmart. Best purchase ever. Because if you have a toddler, obviously they're going to want to like get up and walk around and stuff probably. So if that stresses you out, then consider like, well, how can I get them seated somewhere? I have friends that just bring the high chair outside. Whatever you want to do. If you have older kids, do you have like a place where they can sit and eat outside? Potentially I feel like it'd probably be a lot easier with older kids, but it's also nice with little ones because then they make the mess outside and not in the kitchen. So, but that's something where it's like, kids usually love being outside just like adults, and it can be very calming and grounding. Okay. Dairy intolerant kids, tips for them, minerals to focus on, things like that. So I would say number one is digestion, because typically the question is, why can they not digest that dairy properly? Why is it leading to an inflammatory reaction in the body? It's typically because they're not breaking it down well. So all the things I just talked about was supporting digestion. What is going on in the gut that's creating inflammation? Like, how was your gut health when you were pregnant? Did you breastfeed? Obviously, if not, that's not like we can't have the perfect scenario. Like, I've had so many friends with kids that like did not have everything optimal, but like their kid had an issue and they were still able to resolve it. So it's something where it's like, don't feel like if you had a C-section, your kids had antibiotics. Maybe you had antibiotics when you were pregnant and then you couldn't breastfeed fully. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. So those things can absolutely help, but they don't guarantee it. I mean, I had a home birth, vaginal birth. My daughter was completely breastfed, never been on antibiotic in her life, and she still got eczema. So it's like, there's no perfect scenario. Let the perfectionism go if that's popping up for you right now. You just want to think about, like, did they have a lot of that in their history? If so, they probably need some support for their good gut bacteria and probably digestion. So looking at the eating environment, have you tried any apple cider vinegar gummies? If they can tolerate them, maybe the ACV capsules, whatever kind of works for you. And then, are you getting enough like sodium in their diet, potassium rich foods? Do they have any deficiencies like zinc? Typically, when inflammation is present, zinc is lower because we're using that to respond to the inflammation and the immune reaction in the body. So that's why I'm always like, red meat is very important for everyone, but especially people that have zinc deficiencies, including kids. Can they tolerate fermented foods? Because that could be a great one to support good bacteria. You could potentially do a probiotic depending on the child's needs. Probiotics are they're tricky. I would say, like, for everyone. Adults, I think sport-based probiotics can be great. The research is, as far as I know, and this is something I have dug into quite a bit because of my daughter's issues, is spore-based probiotics in kids. There's not a ton out there. Megaspore does make a chewable probiotic for kids. I would say probably just open up the capsule of a regular Megaspore and use that so that they're getting more benefit. Because the gummy version is I don't know how potent it would be, but it's better than nothing. But again, like, that might not be a good fit for every child. So I don't have like a general probiotic recommendation. Like, my daughter probably wouldn't do well with that. Certain babies, like, it's like, what bacteria do they probably need more of? It's really hard to know. So I would say, like, foods first would be great. Ideally, if you are breastfeeding, there's research that shows that, like, kissing your baby on the mouth and everything, you can get exposed to whatever bacteria they have going on, and that can help change the breakdown of your milk and benefit their immune system more. So that can be really helpful. And then minerals that I want to focus on, if my child was dairy intolerant, definitely zinc, sodium, potassium. I'd want to make sure they're getting enough vitamin A, because that's going to be hugely important for the immune system, for sure. And so I'd definitely probably consider some beef liver. And then my main focus would be digestion for sure. But other foods that can be helpful, like the gummies, they have gelatin. That can be a very nourishing food. If they can tolerate bone broth, they're not getting any histamine reactions, any gut issues. That's another really great food. There are certain bacteria that, if they are overgrown, the Proteus species, that if you have a lot of like collagen bone broth, it has a lot of proline in it. It's an amino acid. It can make that overgrowth worse. So, like, I don't overdo that with my daughter because she did a stool test. She has a lot of that specific bacteria. And while it may go away on its own, ideally, I don't want to like make it worse. So I only do gummies. I don't do like a ton of bone broth or anything. So it's, again, like, we don't have to like overdo foods. They don't have to have, maybe they don't even have bone broth every day. Maybe they have a gummy one day, bone broth another day. If they don't like bone broth, then don't force it. But those are the things that I would definitely consider if there is like a dairy intolerance issue. And then I did get a question about fermented foods, and if that's a better option for probiotics and stuff. And I feel like I kind of answered that one already. But I mean, I would say fermented foods be not my number one, because if your kid can tolerate them, because if you try to do a specific probiotic and they don't have a good reaction, like, one, that can be stressful for them and you. And then two, it's like they're going to get the prebiotics in the food too. They're easy to eat. It's great for their palate. You can get a lot of different types of fermented foods. But I would just be careful in case your kid doesn't react well. It's like, sometimes we'll like, oh, maybe it was this. It's like, but it could definitely be that fermentation process if they're having a hard time. They have a little histamine intolerance. And then the minerals and eczema, I put this under the gut health section because it's absolutely gut related for sure. I am going to do a full episode on it next season. I just don't think I would have to talk about this for a long time. But number one, support digestion. Number two, see if there's any food allergies present. That's a big one. Like I would typically they say like gluten, eggs, and dairy are the biggest ones in relation to eczema. Do one at a time for 2 weeks and see how your child responds. Within 2 weeks, you should see some improvement in the skin. And so that way you're not removing a ton of foods and making your life extremely stressful for no reason. So like my daughter already didn't eat eggs and we removed gluten and we saw a huge improvement in her skin, even though she wasn't even eating that much. So we did not remove dairy. So that's something that you want to experiment with. Some people have to remove dairy for a short period while they're supporting digestion and rebalancing the gut, improving that gut health. But typically there's some sort of imbalance in the gut. It's often an inflammatory pattern that you're going to see on a stool test with them. They're not able to detox well and get toxins out other ways. So it's coming out on their skin. Stress is a huge trigger as well. And again, I feel like people don't recognize that enough in kids. It's like, think back about like when their eczema started, what was happening in their environment and their life and your life like during that time. Because if you may have experienced a big stressor, it will 100% impact them as well. And then things like asthma and allergies, that like the trifecta, asthma, allergies, and then eczema, they often go together. They're all inflammatory. And it's like really eczema is like that allergy reaction on the skin. And I did an episode with my friend Krista that I will link as well. I mean, obviously it's for adults, but it's still very, very helpful. Okay, so then supplements. I talked about probiotics already, fermented foods. I would definitely opt for the foods first. Probiotics, you really want to make sure it's appropriate for your child. Someone asked, like, what's the best magnesium for kids? I really like topical, especially like babies, toddlers. If they take baths, then using it in the bath, like some sort of Epsom salt or magnesium salt can be great. Or like if they're getting a little older and you want more magnesium for them, then concentrates or trace minerals makes like a liquid concentrate that doesn't really taste like much that you could add. And it's like, I like liquid for everyone, but especially kids, because you can titrate it very slowly. So that's, I would say like either a liquid oral one that you can just add to some sort of drink that they're having, or topical, like putting up some salt or something in their bath. If beef liver is not loved, oh yeah, okay. A child does not like beef liver. Can I do capsules? You could definitely do capsules. Again, I feel like sometimes we get a little crazy with supplements and we're like, oh, they got to take them every day. But remember, beef liver is very nutrient dense. And if the child's very young, they don't need it every day. I think even if they're older, honestly. So just trying to work it in like maybe 1 or 2 times a week if you're doing the capsules. If it's a very small child, then I would not do it more than like once a week to start. And then, they definitely don't need a full serving. Like it again, if the less they weigh, the less that they're going to need. And then I would say like, as they get older, like ideally it's like, hopefully they're eating it at that point. And it's like, how often are you including it in your meal planning? Once a week, couple times a month, that's usually plenty for most people, unless you have a specific imbalance you're trying to fix. And then the last one I wanted to mention, because people were kind of like, what supplements do you think are important for kids? I mean, I think food and lifestyle is the most important for kids, and working on their palate and teaching them about food and how it affects their health. I just think that it's underrated versus like, focusing on supplements. Like one of the only things like I prioritize for my daughter at this time is this like humic mineral liquid blend. I actually linked it in my newsletter, but I'll put the link in here too. And that's mainly because it does like a million things at once, but it's really great for gut health. It's helpful for inflammation in the gut. It's great for gut lining. It's helpful. It's got enzymes in it, so it can help support digestion, and it's great for supporting detoxification. So that was one that really, really helped her skin and her eczema, especially when we saw the inflammatory patterns and stuff on her stool test. And I'm like, how can I gently support her and have something that she's actually going to take? And again, it's liquid. So it's so nice because you can give them only a teeny tiny amount. I did not want to have any bad reactions with her. I didn't want to make anything worse. So I went super, super slow with it. But it's like, if it's like a 1 ounce serving for adults. So it's like, I mean, I only do like, a teaspoon for her. So it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be very small. But I think I love this one for clients as well. If they have constipation, other eczema, if they also have eczema, those types of issues, gut health concerns, it's a great one for adults too, but I think it's great for kids as well. I don't think that ideally your child doesn't need a supplement every day. If you have a deficiency that you're trying to fix, is there a whole food version that you can incorporate? If there is a deficiency present, I would always think about digestion. Are you supporting digestion? Are they eating in a relaxed environment? Do they have signs of digestive issues? Like, are they having a good bowel movement every day? What's their bowel movement look like? Do you notice that they don't want to eat meat a lot? That could be definitely a hint of maybe they're not digesting it well. Things like that. Cause yes, you could, I have had clients where we're also working with their children and we're trying to fix a deficiency, but it's very, very few and far between that we're using an isolated mineral, because it will impact their levels of other minerals. And so often when we see a child that has maybe a zinc deficiency, their iron's also low. So it's if you supplement with zinc, it's going to make their iron lower. So that's why it's always great if you can prioritize food or whole food supplements for those things. And ideally knowing how long are they going to take this? When are we going to retest their levels to know if they still need this? And then how can I get this into their diet on a regular basis that's not through a supplement? I think it's so important. Okay, the last big area is testing. I got a lot of questions around testing for babies, toddlers, and kids, especially I would say toddlers is probably number one, but babies too. You can do hair testing technically and stool testing in babies and toddlers, and obviously older children as well. I just think it's one of those in babies, someone under 1, I'm just what are you going to do differently? Will be my question. There is a company called Tiny Health where you can do stool testing on babies. I did one for Eliana when she was young, because she had the egg allergy and I wanted to see what was going on with her gut. It was somewhat helpful, but I honestly, I recently did a stool test with her and that was way more helpful because their gut microbiome is constantly changing and developing. So you have to really understand, sometimes you'll see really high levels of bacteria and it's oh my gosh, do we have to eradicate that? But then you learn, oh, that's actually really normal, especially if that baby's breastfed, because that bacteria helps to break down breast milk. So you have to understand all the nuances of the test. You would not treat it like an adult test at all. Tiny Health, they interpret it for you. But I just found most of the recommendations were pretty standard. And now that I know way more, looking at a GI map stool test for my daughter, I go back to her other tests and I'm okay, there were red flags that I just wasn't educated on for this. So getting help from someone that works with kids, if you do a stool test, is so important because their patterns are so different. Seeing a big variety of bacteria can be normal. So keep that in mind. I would definitely make sure you're working with someone that works with kids. And then with hair testing, it does have different patterns. Their ratio levels are different, and typically every baby, every person is born as a fast metabolic type. So that's something you would want to be looking out for as well. If they're slow, why are they slow? Are they chronically stressed? Where is it coming from? But I'm going to go through a hair test that I did for a toddler in the bonus episode, so you guys can see that there. And then if that's just patreon.com/hormonehealingrd. And then, people were asking what tests you think are the most helpful for babies, toddlers, and kids. I would say hair testing and GI map, usually. I mean, it depends on like what their issue is, but I think about like friends in my life, clients that I've had, like what are like the most common like concerns with children? I feel like digestion's always one, skin is a very common one, behavioral issues are a really common one. And I would definitely combine hair testing with stool testing when possible for kids. I would not do it in babies like under 1, because it's like, how are you going to adjust their food to support that? They're really not eating a ton of food yet. So like, that's why I didn't do my daughter's hair test until she was a little older. Cause I'm like, what am I even going to do based off those results? I don't want to do a test if I'm not going to make a change from it. And it wasn't until like, then she got the eczema and I'm like, all right, well, we're going to do a hair test and a stool test and figure out like where this is coming from, how we can support your body, and like what kind of actions that we can take. So, I hope this episode was helpful. I know it was a lot of information, but I got so many good questions. I was like, I really want to make sure that I cover a lot of these topics. I'm linking so many resources in the show notes. So anything I mentioned, the different recipes, how to prepare stuff, the baby-led weaning course, the podcast that I like for baby-led weaning, that episode on eczema, and so everything I mentioned, I will link it in the show notes. I made notes throughout so that you guys can go do more, because there's only so much I can cover in an hour. But I hope this was helpful. Tag me on Instagram, share, let me know if you enjoyed this one and like what you would want to have more topics on in the future. I was just talking with a colleague and I'm like, I want to have her come back on the podcast to talk about like gut health in kids and different perspective on it. Cause I've definitely taken a very different perspective with my daughter. So more on that. If you guys are interested, just let me know. But thank you as always for being here, and I will see you in the next episode.